It was Christmas Eve, 3 hours before midnight, and the air inside Thornton Manor was thick with anticipation. Outside, snowflakes gently drifted down, blanketing the estate in a soft white hush. Arabella stood by the large frosted window in her room, her fingers tracing the cold glass, her gaze distant. The world outside seemed as frozen as the silence that hung heavy in her heart. She had been waiting for this night, this moment, for 6 years, and now, as the clock ticked closer to midnight, the weight of the past seemed to pull at her soul. She wondered if he remembered. Was he still waiting for her? Or had time, as it so often does, moved on? She closed her eyes, trying to steady her thoughts, but a pang of uncertainty gnawed at her. What would she do if he didn't come? Meanwhile, downstairs in the grand study, Sebastian Grayston, the Duke of Wintermere, sat at his writing desk. His hand hovered over the paper, his quill poised but not moving. He had been writing the same letter for hours, each word a battle between hope and fear. He wanted to tell her everything, but the weight of the promise he'd made, the promise to wait, held him back. 6 years. It felt like a lifetime. Had she forgotten him? Was she happy with someone else? Or had she spent these years waiting just like he had? The letter in front of him remained unfinished. His mind, a storm of emotion, mirrored the winter storm raging outside the windows. But to understand the emotions of this night, the anticipation, and the longing that clung to the air like a heavy fog, we must go back 6 years, to a winter gathering at Thornton Manor where it all began. It was a crisp December evening when Arabella first met Sebastian. She was 17 then, and her mind was full of dreams of art, of independence, of a life beyond the walls of Thornton Manor. She was a clever girl, well-educated and fiercely passionate, but to the people in her life, she was still just a child. Her mother, Lady Thornton, had hopes of finding her a suitable match, a wealthy suitor who would appreciate her beauty and her status. But Arabella wasn't interested in the traditional pursuits of a débutante. She found more joy in her sketchbook than in society's shallow expectations. Sebastian, on the other hand, was newly titled, having inherited his father's title of Duke just a few months earlier. At 26, he was a man weighed down by duty and the grief of his father's passing. He had not asked for this life, this title, this responsibility, but it had been thrust upon him, nonetheless. On the outside, he wore the air of a stoic, detached aristocrat. He had no interest in the frivolous social games or in the women vying for his attention. His heart, so raw from his father's death, had no space for anything but duty until he met Arabella. The first time their eyes met was in the library during a holiday party. The room was filled with a low hum of laughter and chatter, but when Arabella entered, it felt as though everything else faded away. She wasn't like the other girls, who fluttered about in sparkling gowns, eager for the attention of the men. Arabella, with her dark curls and sharp intelligence, stood apart. She seemed untouched by the pressures of society, and that intrigued him. Sebastian had been standing by the fireplace, holding a glass of wine, when he noticed her. She was standing by the tall windows, gazing out into the snowy garden, lost in thought. He had expected her to be like all the others, eager to impress, full of airy talk. But when their conversation started, he was taken aback by her wit and the depth of her thoughts. They began discussing philosophy, politics, and books, subjects that were rare among the ladies of the ton. Arabella's quick, intellectual challenges stirred something in him, something he hadn't expected to find in a girl of 17. But as the conversation deepened, so did his unease. She was so young, too young, he thought. He couldn't let himself feel attracted to her. He had responsibilities, a title to uphold, and a family to care for. Arabella was still a child in society's eyes. He had no business entertaining thoughts of her beyond friendship. Yet, As the evening wore on, Sebastian couldn't shake the feeling that he had met someone extraordinary. Arabella, for her part, was equally intrigued by him. She found his cynical outlook on life, shaped by the weight of his newly inherited title, both frustrating and fascinating. She had no interest in marriage as a business arrangement or a social duty. She wanted more than that. She wanted a partnership based on mutual respect, intellectual connection, and love. It was the first time she had met a man who seemed to share her ideals, but there was something in his eyes that told her he was hiding a great deal, perhaps even from himself. As the night wore on, Sebastian excused himself from the conversation and left the library. He told himself it was because he had duties to attend to as the Duke, but the truth was, he was troubled. Troubled by the way Arabella had made him feel, by the way her intelligence had drawn him in, and by the strange sense of peace he had felt in her company. But he couldn't allow himself to go further. Not with someone so young. Not with someone like her. Arabella watched him leave the library, a quiet curiosity blooming in her chest. She had seen many men come and go over the years, each one more concerned with his own standing than with any true connection. But Sebastian was different. There was something in the way he carried himself, something more than just the title he wore. He was a man who carried his burdens with quiet dignity, and yet, there was a sadness in his eyes that she couldn't ignore. She couldn't help but wonder, what was behind that mask he wore? Neither of them knew it then, but that meeting would change the course of both their lives. It was the beginning of something neither of them could have foreseen, a connection that would transcend time and distance, a bond that would test both their hearts in ways they couldn't yet understand. And so, the story of Sebastian and Arabella began, though neither of them could have imagined the twists and turns that would follow, nor the 6 long years they would spend apart. As the clock ticked closer to midnight on Christmas Eve, Arabella pressed her hand to her chest. Was he still waiting for her? Had he moved on? Over the next 2 years, their relationship grew, though never in the way either of them had hoped. Sebastian, ever the dutiful Duke, began to visit Thornton Manor more frequently, drawn to the intellectual connection he shared with Arabella. What began as casual visits to the family turned into tutoring sessions where Sebastian taught Arabella philosophy, politics, and literature. He was captivated by her sharp mind, her ability to challenge his views, and the passion she brought to every discussion. Arabella, for her part, was utterly drawn to him, admiring his intelligence and maturity, though she was often frustrated by his distance. Sebastian, despite his growing admiration for her, remained firm in his resolve to keep his distance, constantly reminding himself of their age gap, his responsibilities, and the fact that she was still too young. But as the seasons passed, Arabella blossomed from a young girl into a woman, and Sebastian found himself struggling to suppress the deep feelings that had quietly taken root in his heart. Their walks through the snow-covered gardens, their debates by the fireplace, and their shared moments of intellectual discovery became the foundation of a love neither could admit. Arabella's feelings, so innocent at first, deepened with each passing day, but she could see the subtle way Sebastian held himself back, the way he avoided her gaze when it lingered a moment too long. When she turned 19, a quiet tension began to settle between them, and she could no longer ignore the growing sense that something important was changing. Society had begun to expect her debut, suitors started to circle, and though many were perfectly suitable, none of them stirred the same fire in her heart that Sebastian did. She had known for some time that her heart belonged to him, but it wasn't until she turned 19 that she realized she could no longer pretend that she was just a child in his eyes. As Arabella stepped into adulthood, Sebastian's internal conflict deepened. He had promised himself that he would not interfere with her choices, that she deserved to live her life without the constraints of his affections. He told himself that she needed the freedom to experience the world, to choose her own path, and not be weighed down by his feelings. So, he began to pull away, quietly at first, then more obviously, avoiding Thornton Manor altogether. For months, he disappeared, sending only polite, distant letters, his absence a painful ache in Arabella's chest. His sudden withdrawal was a sharp contrast to the warm camaraderie they had shared, and it left her questioning everything. She began to wonder if she had misinterpreted their connection, if perhaps the intellectual bond they had shared had only been in her mind. But the more time passed, the more certain she became that he felt something for her too. The silence from Sebastian was not because he didn't care, it was because he cared too much. She would never admit it, not aloud, but she had begun to count the days since his last visit, marking each passing moment with a sharp ache of longing. With her birthday fast approaching, and Christmas just around the corner, Arabella knew she couldn't keep waiting in silence any longer. She would confront him, demand answers, and discover once and for all whether the love that had grown in her heart was as real to him as it was to her. And so, with determination in her heart and a growing sense of urgency, Arabella resolved that on her 19th birthday, she would make her choice clear. She would make Sebastian face the truth of his feelings, or she would be forced to let him go. No more silence. No more waiting. That night would change everything. Arabella's 19th birthday arrived, and the tension that had been building for months now thickened the air at Thornton Manor. The house was alive with the bustle of preparations for her birthday celebration, yet her thoughts were far from the festivities. She had spent countless nights turning over the decision in her mind, replaying every conversation, every glance, and every moment she had shared with Sebastian. She knew what she had to do. Tonight, she would finally confront him, demand answers, and, hopefully, bring an end to the confusion that had plagued her heart for so long. As the evening wore on, she found herself standing alone in the quiet garden of Thornton Manor, the soft crunch of snow beneath her boots the only sound breaking the stillness. The soft glow of the ballroom windows illuminated the world around her, but it was the sound of footsteps in the snow that made her turn. And there, standing in the shadows, was Sebastian. Her heart skipped a beat at the sight of him. He looked every bit the Duke, even more handsome than she remembered. His face was still marked by the shadows of his past grief, but there was a vulnerability in his eyes that she had never seen before. The distance between them that had grown over the past month seemed to vanish in an instant as she stepped forward, her breath coming in soft clouds in the cold winter air. "Why have you been avoiding me?" she demanded, the words escaping her before she could stop them. He looked at her, pain flickering in his gaze, but he didn't look away. His voice was low, almost a whisper, when he spoke. "Because I love you, Arabella. And I shouldn't." Her heart pounded in her chest, the truth of his words sinking into her bones. She had suspected it, had hoped for it, but hearing it from his lips made everything real. Her voice trembled as she replied, "I've loved you for 2 years, Sebastian." The confession hung between them, heavy and full of the longing they had both denied for so long. But Sebastian, always the one to pull away, stepped back, his expression troubled. "You're too young," he said softly, almost as though he were speaking to himself. "You deserve freedom, the chance to experience life, to choose a future without being bound by the love of a man who has too many responsibilities." Arabella shook her head, her heart defiant in the face of his worries. "I've spent these years waiting for you, Sebastian," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I don't want anyone else. I don't need freedom, not from you. I need you." But Sebastian, though clearly shaken by her words, remained steadfast in his resolve. "If I take you as my own, I will cage you, Arabella," he said, his voice rough. "You'll be bound to me and my title. You won't have the freedom you deserve. I can't do that to you." The words were like a blow to her chest, but Arabella refused to let him dismiss her so easily. "I'm not a child anymore," she said fiercely, her gaze unwavering. "I choose you. And I'll choose you every day for the rest of my life, if you'll have me." For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of their breath in the cold night air, the distance between them still palpable despite the closeness of their confessions. And then, Sebastian sighed deeply, his expression shifting. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time, and in his gaze, Arabella saw the weight of his internal battle. "Then I must give you a choice," he said, his voice tight. "I will not take you from your life, Arabella. I will not be the reason you give up your future, your dreams. If you still want me in 5 years, when you've had the chance to live, to make your own choices, to choose your path, then I will be here. I will wait. But I will give you this time, this freedom, to make the decision without me." Arabella stared at him, shocked and confused by his proposal. 5 years, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 5 years without contact. He nodded, his expression grim. No letters, no visits. You will have the chance to live your life fully, Arabella. You'll be free of me and free to choose whatever future you want. If, when you turn 24, you are still unmarried and still want me, come to Wintermere Hall. I will be waiting for you. The silence between them was deafening as Arabella processed his words. She had never expected this, never thought that Sebastian would push her away so completely, so selflessly. But there was a logic to it, a part of her understood what he was doing, even if it broke her heart. "And if I don't come?" she asked, her voice small. His gaze softened for a brief moment before hardening again. "Then I will release you. No guilt. No obligation. If you don't come, I will set you free. You will have no more ties to me." Arabella's heart ached at the thought of it, but she nodded slowly. This was the only way, she realized. The only way to prove that she was truly his, if she could still choose him after 5 years of being apart. "I'll come," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'll come back to you. I promise." Sebastian's face softened at her words, and for a brief, shining moment, Arabella saw the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had been hiding behind his stoic facade all these years. He reached for her then, pulling her close. Their first kiss was everything she had dreamed of and more, desperate, passionate, and full of a promise neither of them could deny. It was a kiss that sealed their pact, a kiss that held the weight of 6 years of waiting and the hope of a future they would only share if she kept her promise. When they pulled apart, their breath coming in ragged gasps, Sebastian held out a silver key pendant. "This will open the door to Wintermere Hall when you come," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "When the time comes, it will be a symbol of everything I've waited for." Arabella took the key, her fingers trembling as she held it. She had never felt such a powerful connection to anything before. She knew, in that moment, that her life was changing forever. "I'll wait for you," Sebastian said quietly, his eyes full of a longing that mirrored her own. 5 years, Arabella. I'll wait for you." As Sebastian rode away into the night, his figure slowly disappearing into the snow, Arabella stood there, clutching the key to Wintermere Hall, a symbol of the future that she now had to wait for. 5 years. It seemed like an eternity, and yet, somehow, it felt like nothing at all. But as she stood there in the cold, the weight of the key around her neck felt heavier than ever. She had promised him, and she would keep that promise. No matter what. The years that followed were both painful and transformative for both Arabella and Sebastian. As Arabella stepped into her early 20s, she became the talk of London's high society, her debut a grand affair that brought suitors from all corners. But no matter how many proposals she received, no matter how many men courted her, none of them stirred her heart the way Sebastian had. Each time a suitor asked for her hand, she would smile politely, but her thoughts would always drift to him, the man she had promised to wait for, the man who had sealed her heart with a key. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate the attention or the affection of others, but none could compare to the intellectual connection she had shared with Sebastian. She had grown into a woman, one who was praised for her beauty, intelligence, and independence, yet she carried a secret that weighed heavily on her, the memory of him, the promise of his return, and the unspoken love that had been placed in a deep, quiet corner of her heart. In the eyes of society, she had become known as the impossible Miss Thornton, a woman who had rejected 17 proposals, a woman who refused to settle for anything less than the deep connection she had once felt with a man who had disappeared from her life. Her father, though proud of her, began to grow concerned. His thoughts, like those of many in their circle, turned to securing her future, and with each passing year, the pressure to marry, to choose, grew heavier. He could not understand why she kept rejecting such fine suitors, and though Arabella was still a dutiful daughter, she had no intention of marrying any man who did not stir her soul the way Sebastian had. But as the years went by, her hope waned. Had he forgotten her? Was he even alive to keep his promise? Despite her fears, she clung to the key he had given her, wearing it always, though it remained hidden beneath her dresses. To the outside world, she was a beautiful young woman coming of age, but inside, she was a woman waiting, longing, and wondering. Meanwhile, Sebastian, though absent from her life, was far from distant. As the Duke of Wintermere, he had become a figure of mystery, cold, distant, and seemingly uninterested in the high society life that his title demanded. He rejected every potential match, though his reasons were not publicly known. No one could understand why he remained unmarried, but Sebastian had his own reasons for staying apart from society. He had made a vow 6 years ago, and he intended to keep it. Yet, despite his resolve to remain detached, his mind and heart were not at rest. Sebastian could not escape Arabella from his thoughts. He secretly attended balls, gatherings, and events where he knew she would be, though always from a distance. He would linger in the shadows, watching her dance with other men, his heart aching as he observed the woman he loved growing more beautiful with each passing year. He would have his valet report back to him with details of her suitors, how many proposals she had turned down, who she was seen with. It tormented him. He had made a promise to give her space, to let her choose her own path, but the agony of knowing she was slipping away from him, potentially choosing someone else, gnawed at him. The very act of watching her, seeing her live the life that he had been forced to step away from, felt like a cruel reminder of his own sacrifice. He tried to suppress the feeling, convincing himself that he had done the right thing, that he had given her the freedom she needed. But the truth was that every time he saw her at a distance, dancing, laughing, caught up in the joy of life, his heart would break a little more. He had to know, though, and so he kept a journal, chronicling every time he saw her or heard of her. He documented the way she had looked that night at the ball, how she had smiled, how her eyes seemed to shine a little brighter when she spoke of her future. Every little detail was captured in the pages of his private book, a book that no one would ever see. He kept track of her life, but he did so quietly, with the guilt of knowing that he was watching her from the shadows, unable to reach out, unable to comfort her. At times, he questioned his decision. Had he made a mistake in giving her this freedom? Should he have fought harder for her? The uncertainty was maddening, and yet he remained firm, as if his own sacrifice was a noble act that would somehow make their future together all the more meaningful. As the years wore on, Arabella's internal struggle mirrored his. She was approaching her 23rd birthday, and the pressure from her family had never been greater. Her father's health was deteriorating, and the talk of marriage became more insistent with each passing day. Her mother, too, began to press her to make a decision, to finally choose someone and secure her future. And then there was Edmund Hartley, a man who had been in her life for the past few years, and who had been pursuing her with steady determination. Edmund was charming, polite, and respected by all, and though he did not stir the passions in her that Sebastian once had, Arabella couldn't deny that he was the ideal suitor in every way. He was of the right age, had the right connections, and most importantly, he could offer her security, a future free of worry. Yet even as Edmund's courtship deepened, Arabella could not shake the feeling that she was betraying the promise she had made to Sebastian. As the deadline for their pact approached, the question loomed larger in her mind: should she wait for a memory, or should she accept a reality? The final year of their separation had begun, and with it came a sense of urgency. Arabella knew that time was running out, and she could not keep living in the limbo of waiting for a man who might never return. But the thought of choosing Edmund, of letting go of the only love she had ever known, was unbearable. Still, she had promised Sebastian that she would live her life, and she had done so. Now it was time to decide whether she could keep the promise she had made to herself and to him, or whether she would let the future slip through her fingers, swallowed by the uncertainty of their past. 6 months before the deadline, life at Thornton Manor became shadowed by looming uncertainty. Lord Thornton, Arabella's beloved father, had fallen seriously ill. The once vibrant and commanding figure of the estate had grown frail, his energy slowly draining away. The family doctor had given a grim prognosis: Lord Thornton's condition was terminal, with only a few months left. Arabella, who had always admired her father's strength, now watched helplessly as the man who had raised her, who had guided her with gentle wisdom, was slowly slipping away. The news came as a shock, not only because of the imminent loss but also because of the financial strain it revealed. Thornton Manor, once a symbol of wealth and status, was now revealed to be in a far more precarious position than Arabella had ever known. The estate's finances had been mismanaged for years, hidden behind the veneer of aristocratic charm. The once thriving family holdings had begun to decline, and the future of the estate was uncertain. This revelation added an unbearable weight to the already difficult circumstances, for Lord Thornton's greatest wish in his final months was clear: he wanted to see his daughter settled and secured in a marriage before he passed away. He feared that without a good match, Arabella's future would be uncertain, her independence threatened, and the family's standing in society would wither. As his condition worsened, Lord Thornton grew increasingly insistent. He could not bear the thought of Arabella remaining unmarried, with no one to provide for her. Arabella's mother, Lady Thornton, echoed these concerns, pressing Arabella to accept one of the many suitors who had been circling her in the past few years. Chief among them was Edmund Hartley, the well-mannered, well-positioned Viscount who had expressed a genuine interest in Arabella. Edmund, in contrast to the passionate love she had shared with Sebastian, was everything society deemed ideal: a gentleman of status, with wealth, connections, and a steady, unshakable demeanor. He was suitable in every way, and Arabella knew that her mother was eager to see her married off to him. Yet, as much as she respected Edmund and his quiet sincerity, Arabella could not bring herself to feel the same stirring of affection that had once ignited in her for Sebastian. Edmund represented stability, but stability, Arabella had learned, was not always enough. The pressure from her family was relentless. As the months wore on, her father's condition continued to deteriorate, and the urgency for her to make a decision became unbearable. Her mother's constant reminders, her father's heartfelt appeals on his deathbed, left Arabella feeling torn between the duty to her family and the promise she had made to Sebastian. Her father, in his final days, spoke to her with a kind of desperation in his voice. "You've waited for a ghost," he told her one afternoon, his voice weak but filled with an intensity that shook her to the core. "The Duke never returned, Arabella. He's forgotten you." The word struck her like a blow, each syllable sinking into her heart like a dagger. Her father, unaware of the pact she had made with Sebastian, believed she had been waiting in vain. He could not understand why she had rejected so many offers and was so fixated on a man who had disappeared from her life. His dying wish was simple: he wanted her to secure a future before he was gone. He needed peace of mind, knowing that his daughter would be safe, cared for, and protected. "Please, Arabella," he begged, his voice raspy. Give me peace before I die. Marry Edmund. He will take care of you. I can't leave this world knowing you're alone. Arabella was devastated by her father's plea. He was asking her to let go of the only love she had ever known, to let go of the man who had promised to wait for her. But she could see the pain in her father's eyes, the love and concern for her future. She knew what he was asking was not only for her security but for his own peace before his death. In the wake of her father's emotional appeal, Arabella sought solace in her sister, Lillian. The two sisters had always been close, but in this moment, Arabella felt more connected to Lillian than ever before. They shared an unspoken bond, and in the privacy of their conversation, Lillian revealed a secret that shocked Arabella to her core. "I love Edmund," Lillian confessed quietly, her eyes downcast. "I've loved him for over a year, but I never said anything. I never wanted to get in your way." The revelation hit Arabella hard. Her sister, the one person who had always been by her side, was silently carrying the same burden she had been carrying herself. Lillian, too, was torn between love and duty, but unlike Arabella, she had never had a promise to keep. "I won't stand in your way," Lillian added softly. "If you choose him, I'll support you. But, Arabella, you need to follow your heart. You know what I mean. The Duke clearly loved you. He's not forgotten you." The words of her sister resonated deeply within Arabella, and she found herself once again torn. She loved Sebastian, but the duty to her father, to her family, felt just as pressing. She had always been a dutiful daughter, and now, as her father's condition worsened, she felt the weight of that responsibility more than ever. Edmund, though not the man of her heart, represented security, stability, and the future her father had always wanted for her. Arabella, with a heavy heart, decided to consider Edmund seriously, to give him the chance her father so desperately wanted. But she couldn't reveal the full truth to anyone. She couldn't tell them about the promise she had made, about the pact she had sealed with Sebastian. She couldn't let anyone know that she had been waiting for a man who might never come. As the days passed, Arabella wore the key pendant under her gown, the symbol of her unspoken love, hidden away from the world. She told herself she would give Edmund an answer by Christmas, as promised. But deep down, she knew that no matter how hard she tried to push her feelings aside, Sebastian would always be the one she truly loved. As the weeks counted down to Christmas Eve, the decision loomed larger than ever. Would she break her promise to Sebastian and accept Edmund, the man who would secure her future? Or would she hold out hope for a love that might never return? It was Christmas Eve morning, and Arabella awoke to the soft light filtering through her bedroom curtains, the day's chill seeping through the cracks of the window. The manor was alive with the hustle and bustle of last-minute preparations for the grand ball that evening, but Arabella couldn't bring herself to focus on the festivities. Her mind was elsewhere, swirling with uncertainty and dread. 6 years had passed since she had made that promise to Sebastian, the promise that tonight, Christmas Eve, she would make her choice. As the clock on her mantel ticked away the hours, her heart ached with anticipation. Would he come? Or had time, as it so often did, swept him away from her? Arabella couldn't shake the thought of what might be waiting for her this evening. The key pendant he had given her all those years ago now felt heavy around her neck. She had worn it every day since, though it remained hidden beneath her dresses, a silent symbol of the love she had never been able to forget. She had rejected all the suitors who had come her way, not because they weren't good men, but because none had ever made her heart race the way Sebastian had. None had ever understood her the way he did. And yet, as the clock inched closer to the evening, the reality of her situation weighed on her. Edmund Hartley, the man who had courted her for the past few years, had made his intentions clear. Tonight, he would propose to her, in front of all their family and friends. Arabella's heart twisted at the thought. Edmund was everything a woman could ask for: handsome, well-mannered, and from a respected family, but he was not Sebastian. Her duty to her family, her father's dying wish for her to be settled before his passing, pressed heavily upon her, and yet, there was something else, a voice deep inside her that whispered she wasn't ready to let go of her past. Would she make the choice to honor her family's wishes, or would she follow her heart and risk everything for a love that had waited, unspoken, for 6 long years? As the morning slipped away, the preparations for the evening's ball continued, but Arabella's thoughts were consumed with only one thing: Sebastian. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was out there, waiting, just as she had. The idea that he might not show, that he might have moved on, was too painful to consider. She spent the morning in a fog, her mind racing with doubt and fear, her hands trembling as she helped her sister, Lillian, with last-minute tasks. It was impossible to focus. As the day wore on, Arabella found herself staring out of the window, her gaze lost in the swirling snow. The sound of the carriage wheels on the frozen drive below seemed to bring her back to the present. She shook her head, as if trying to clear the thoughts that clouded her mind. Everything she had done in these past years, rejecting suitors, holding on to a key, waiting for a man who had promised to return, seemed so distant now, so impossible. Was it worth it? The question echoed in her mind, and yet, she knew the answer. Sebastian had been the only one to truly see her, to challenge her, to make her feel alive in a way no one else could. No one else had ever made her feel as though she mattered. The choice had never been easy. Even now, as the clock ticked closer to midnight, Arabella could not shake the fear that she might be too late. What if he had forgotten her? What if, all these years, he had found someone else? And yet, as much as her heart ached with the possibility of that reality, she knew deep down that she would never truly be at peace unless she knew for sure. She needed to know if he was still waiting for her, if the promise they had made all those years ago still held meaning for him. She wasn't sure how much longer she could live with the uncertainty, with the weight of her heart tied to a man who might never return. At the same time, a part of her knew that the life she had built in London, rejecting one suitor after another, holding on to the ghost of a love that may have been lost, couldn't continue forever. As the evening drew nearer, the house grew more frantic with preparations. Arabella found herself at the center of it all, her mother urging her to prepare for the ball, her father too ill to attend but insistent that she find happiness in a secure match. Her heart clenched at the thought of her father, whose life had been marked by duty and responsibility, now asking her to follow the same path. He couldn't understand why she had waited for someone who might never come. His concern for her future overshadowed his understanding of the depth of her heart's desires. In the midst of the chaos, Arabella couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of unease that had settled over her. She felt torn between duty and desire, between the life her family expected for her and the love she had promised herself. As the afternoon passed and the evening loomed closer, Arabella found herself standing in front of the mirror in her room, the silver key pendant now resting openly against her skin for the first time in years. The pendant had always been a secret, a symbol of a love that had remained locked away in her heart, but tonight, it felt like a key to her future, a future she wasn't sure she could walk into alone. Her thoughts shifted to Sebastian, wondering if he was waiting for her, just as she had waited for him. Was he still the man he had been 6 years ago, the man who had promised to wait, or had time changed him too? The uncertainty of what awaited her later that night gnawed at her, but there was no turning back now. She would have to make her decision, face the choice that had been building for 6 years. By the time the clock struck midnight, Arabella would either choose Edmund, the man who had come to mean security and comfort, or she would choose the unknown, the man who had promised to love her, no matter how long it took for her to return. She didn't know which path would lead to happiness, but she knew one thing for certain: she had to choose, and she could not live in the shadow of uncertainty any longer. The decision was coming, and there was no way to escape it. As the clock continued its relentless march toward midnight, Arabella knew that everything would change that night. Would she find the courage to choose what her heart had always known, or would she take the path that her family had hoped for? Only time would tell. As the day wore on and the evening drew closer, Arabella sought solace in the one place that had always been hers, her childhood bedroom. The grand estate was alive with activity, guests arriving for the ball, the sounds of laughter and music filling the halls, but Arabella couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something that had been missing for years. The only thing that could ease the turmoil inside her was the quiet solitude of her room. She needed to think, to process everything that had happened and what was about to unfold. In the quiet of her room, as she sat at her vanity, Arabella's gaze fell upon a box on the shelf, one she hadn't noticed in years. It was an old wooden box, faded with time, with her name etched in delicate script across the lid. Intrigued, she reached for it, her hands trembling as she opened it. Inside, there was a letter, an old letter, yellowed with age. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized the handwriting. It was Sebastian's. The letter had been written 5.5 years ago, before he had disappeared from her life, before she had made the promise to wait. Her heart raced as she carefully unfolded the paper, her eyes scanning the words that had been written with such careful thought and emotion. The letter revealed something she had never known. Sebastian had written to her father, seeking his permission to court her. He had written before he left, before the silence had settled between them, asking for the very thing that she had longed for but never received. Her father had rejected the request. He had refused Sebastian's plea, calling it inappropriate due to the age difference between them. The pain of reading those words, knowing that Sebastian had been so committed to her, that he had asked for her father's blessing only to be turned away, was a sharp stab to her heart. It was then that Arabella realized that her father had known all along. He had known about Sebastian's feelings, had known about their connection, but he had hidden the truth from her. The letter had been kept from her, hidden away, perhaps to protect her from the heartbreak that had followed. But her father's dying words, his plea for her to move on, had never made sense to her until now. It was clear that he had kept the truth from her, perhaps to avoid the agony of seeing her wait for someone who might never return. The realization hit her hard. Her father, in his concern for her future, had never truly understood the depth of her love for Sebastian. The key that hung around her neck, the symbol of their pact, now felt more significant than ever. It wasn't just a promise between her and Sebastian, it was a promise to herself, a promise that she had kept despite the years of separation, the doubts, and the societal pressures that had mounted on her shoulders. The discovery of the letter only solidified what she had known all along: her heart had always belonged to him. As the initial shock wore off, Arabella found herself gathering the strength to go through her old journals, the ones she had kept hidden away for so long. They were full of her thoughts and feelings during the years of separation, the years when she had tried to live without Sebastian, the man who had stolen her heart. The journals were a chronicle of their moments together, the walks they had taken, the conversations they had shared, the way he had made her feel alive and seen. Each page was a testament to the love that had grown quietly, patiently, in the depths of her heart. As Arabella flipped through the pages, she found drawings of Sebastian, sketches of his face and the way he had looked at her in those fleeting moments when their gazes had connected. There were lines of poetry, too, poems she had written about him, about their connection, about the way he had challenged her to think, to dream, to imagine a life beyond the ordinary. All of it had been hidden away, tucked into the corners of her soul, buried beneath the weight of the years that had passed. But now, as she sat there, reading through the words and sketches, Arabella realized that the love she had for Sebastian had never faded. It had only grown stronger, more profound, more certain with each passing year. The doubt that had plagued her, whether he still remembered her, whether he still loved her, was gone. The proof was in front of her. The truth was clear: Sebastian had loved her too. But now, the question was not whether he loved her, it was whether she was brave enough to go after that love, to risk everything for it, to walk away from the life she had built in London and into an uncertain future with him. The decision was no longer about waiting for someone who might never come, it was about facing the reality that she had waited long enough, that she had allowed fear to keep her from what she truly wanted. As Arabella closed the journals and placed them back in the drawer, she felt a surge of determination. She couldn't go on living in the shadows of a love that had already defined her. She had promised Sebastian that she would wait for him, and now the time had come to make that promise real. But still, the fear remained. What if he had moved on? What if he was no longer the man she had known, the man who had promised to wait for her? What if he had found someone else to share his life with? The uncertainty of what might await her at Windermere Hall left her trembling. The stakes were high, and the possibility of heartbreak was real. But she knew, deep down, that she couldn't stay in this limbo any longer. She had to find out if the love they had shared was enough to bridge the gap of time and distance. With a deep breath, Arabella stood up, clutching the key pendant in her hand. She had made up her mind. No more waiting. No more wondering. She would go to Windermere Hall. She would find Sebastian, and whatever the outcome, she would know. She would have her answer. And as the clock ticked on, Arabella prepared herself for the final decision that would define the rest of her life. She knew the risks. But she also knew that this was the only path that would lead her to true peace. The key was in her hand, and it was time to open the door. The Christmas Eve ball at Thornton Manor began as the clock struck 8 p.m., and guests began arriving in their finest attire. The manor's grand ballroom sparkled with chandeliers and the scent of holly, pine, and warm mulled wine, an extravagant display of holiday cheer. Arabella entered, a vision in a stunning ice blue silk gown that caught the light with every movement. The gown clung to her graceful figure, with delicate lace edging the neckline and sleeves. Around her neck, a key pendant gleamed, a family heirloom that had never been seen publicly before. It swayed gently with each step she took, drawing the attention of the guests. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Will she accept Viscount Hartley tonight?" some murmured, while others speculated about the meaning of the pendant and its significance. Edmund stood nervously by the grand fireplace, his eyes fixed on Arabella, as she swept past with her mother in tow. Lady Margaret, ever watchful, kept guiding Edmund toward her daughter, but Arabella's mind was elsewhere, lost in a tumult of thoughts, her eyes occasionally darting toward the clock. She was distracted, torn between duty and her own heart's longings. The minutes seemed to stretch endlessly before her, each one a reminder of the decision she had yet to make. As the evening wore on, the tension in the air thickened like the chill of winter, but no one could see the storm brewing within Arabella's heart. Edmund waited, hopeful yet uncertain, while she struggled with her thoughts. The clock continued ticking away the minutes, each one a moment closer to her decision. At 9 p.m., the first dance began. The orchestra struck up a lively waltz, and couples flooded the floor, their laughter and conversation blending into a harmonious symphony. Arabella joined, but her movements were mechanical, almost as though her body was moving without her mind. She danced with her mother, who proudly looked on, but her heart was elsewhere. Edmund, sensing her detachment, moved in swiftly, claiming her for the next dance. He took her hand with a smile, but his concern was evident. "You seem far away tonight, Arabella," he said softly, his voice laced with tenderness. She looked at him, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm sorry, Edmund. You deserve someone fully present." Her words hung between them, heavy with unspoken truth. Edmund frowned, but before he could say anything, his eyes were drawn to the key pendant hanging around her neck, catching the light from the chandelier above. He had noticed it earlier, but now it seemed to demand his attention. "What does it open?" he asked, his voice laced with curiosity. Arabella's gaze flickered, and she quickly lowered her eyes. She didn't know how to answer, for the pendant symbolized more than she was willing to admit. I don't know, she replied softly, avoiding his penetrating gaze. The conversation faltered, and Edmund's smile faded as he realized that she was slipping further away from him, even in that moment of closeness. As the night wore on, the mood in the ballroom shifted. Champagne was served, and at 10 p.m., a toast was made in celebration of Christmas. The clinking of glasses echoed through the room, but Arabella's nerves were fraying. She had planned to slip away soon, to retreat into the shadows and escape the mounting pressure of the evening. One more hour, just one more hour, and she would be free. Free from the expectations of her family, from the weight of Viscount Hartley's persistent courting, and from the haunting thoughts of the man she had loved and lost 6 years ago. But the thought of slipping away felt impossible as she watched Edmund and the other guests around her. Their happiness only served to deepen her own isolation. She felt as though she were trapped in a gilded cage, unable to escape the expectations that society and her family had placed upon her. At Wintermere, Sebastian had reached his breaking point. For 6 long years, he had waited for her decision, for a sign, for a chance to reclaim what he had lost. He had held out hope, believing that one day, Arabella would remember the love they once shared. But tonight, as he sat in his study, watching the snow fall softly outside, he realized he could wait no longer. The clock had ticked away the years, but now, at last, it was time for action. He ordered his horse to be saddled, his heart pounding with determination. "I've waited 6 years," he muttered under his breath. "I won't wait another 90 minutes. His valet, still in disbelief, looked at him with concern. "Your Grace, what if she has made another choice? What if she's chosen him?" he asked, his voice filled with hesitation. Sebastian's jaw clenched. "Then I'll hear it from her own lips, and I'll know I tried. I owe it to her. I owe it to myself." He threw on his heavy coat and stepped into the cold, the snow biting at his skin as he mounted his horse and rode off into the winter night. The journey to Thornton Manor was long and arduous, but Sebastian didn't care. Every mile was another step closer to Arabella, to the woman he had loved with every ounce of his being. His heart raced with anticipation, each beat echoing in his chest like the pounding of hooves on the frozen earth. By the time he arrived at Thornton Manor, the clock had already struck 10:45 p.m. He was breathless, his clothes covered in snow from the hard ride. His face was flushed from the cold, and his hair was tousled from the wind, but nothing could quell the fire burning inside him. He entered the ballroom without hesitation, his boots clicking on the marble floors. The entire room seemed to freeze as he walked in, his presence like a shock to the senses, a sudden and dramatic shift in the atmosphere. The guests turned in unison, their eyes wide with disbelief, whispering among themselves. "The frozen Duke," someone murmured. "He's come." A murmur of scandal rippled through the assembly as all eyes fell on the man who had been absent for so long. Sebastian's gaze searched the crowd, his heart pounding in his chest. And then, across the room, he saw her, Arabella. Their eyes locked across the crowded ballroom, and in that single moment, 6 years of separation melted away. Time stood still. All the doubts, the fears, the unanswered questions, vanished from their gaze. It was as though they had never been apart. The guests fell silent, watching in stunned amazement. Edmund, who had been so certain of his place beside Arabella, stepped back, understanding without a word what had just transpired. Sebastian began walking toward her, his every step deliberate, as if each one brought him closer to the woman he had always loved. The crowd parted before him, but it didn't matter. His focus was solely on her, and she, too, was moving toward him, drawn by an invisible force. The ballroom held its breath as the tension between them mounted. The Duke had come to claim her, but would she accept him before all of society? Sebastian's bold entrance into the ballroom had stunned the entire gathering, but it was his words that truly shattered the carefully constructed facade of propriety that had governed Thornton Manor for so long. Arabella felt the weight of every pair of eyes upon her, the gasps of shock and disbelief echoing around the room, but all she could see was him, Sebastian. He moved through the crowd with a quiet determination, his eyes locked on hers, as though they were the only two people in the room. The murmurs from the guests only seemed to fade away as the space between them closed, and in that moment, Arabella knew what she had to do. She had to make her choice, in front of them all, for there would be no hiding the truth any longer. The silence that followed his declaration was thick with tension, the anticipation in the room palpable. Sebastian's words rang in Arabella's ears as he continued, his voice steady, despite the emotions that must have been surging within him. "I have waited 6 years for this moment," he said, his gaze unwavering. 6 years of silence, of distance, of wondering whether you would ever come back to me. And now, Arabella, I stand before you, as I promised, to claim what is mine. I have waited for you, and I will wait for you still, but this is the moment I can no longer remain in the shadows. His voice carried across the ballroom, and for a moment, it was as though the world outside the walls of Thornton Manor had disappeared. The guests were frozen, caught between scandal and awe, but Arabella felt only a rush of emotions, the warmth of his presence, the depth of his love, and the weight of the choice she now had to make. She had been waiting for him for so long, holding on to a promise that had felt both like a lifeline and a burden. And now, here he was, standing before her, waiting for her to choose him. But it was not just his words that shook her, it was the act of his public declaration. In front of everyone who had ever judged her, who had watched her reject suitor after suitor, Sebastian had come to claim her. The thought of this moment, once so distant and improbable, felt like a dream come true. And yet, it was real. It was happening. Arabella took a deep breath, her chest tightening as she reached up to her neck, her fingers brushing the cool surface of the key pendant that had become such a powerful symbol of her love for him. For so long, it had been a secret, something she wore to remind herself of the promise they had made, but now, here, in the presence of everyone, it was no longer hidden. She removed it from around her neck, her heart racing as she raised the key high for all to see. The gesture was bold, a declaration in itself, and as she held it up, she could feel every eye in the room on her. The silence that followed felt heavy, as though the world was holding its breath. "I've worn this key every day since the moment you gave it to me," Arabella's voice broke through the quiet, strong and sure. "I've worn it to remind myself that I would wait for you. I would wait, no matter how long it took. I've compared every man who has courted me to you, Sebastian, and none of them have ever come close. I've rejected 17 proposals, not because they weren't good men, but because I've always known that you were the one I would choose." Her words, though simple, carried the weight of 6 years of longing, of uncertainty, and of unwavering love. The room seemed to exhale in unison as Arabella moved toward him, her heart pounding in her chest with each step. The realization that she was finally making this choice, in front of all these people, was almost too much to bear, but there was no turning back now. She reached him, and without a moment's hesitation, she crossed the distance between them, her hand rising to touch his cheek. The years of separation seemed to vanish in that touch, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with a mixture of tenderness and defiance. "I choose you, Sebastian. I've always chosen you, even when you were miles away, even when I didn't know if you were still waiting. I choose you, now and always." Sebastian's eyes softened with emotion as he stepped forward, his hand reaching for hers. He didn't say anything, there was no need for words. His action spoke louder than anything he could have said. With a swift movement, he pulled her into his arms, and the kiss they shared was nothing short of breathtaking. It was a kiss that spoke of all the years they had spent apart, of the promise they had made to each other, and of the love that had never wavered, no matter the distance. The ballroom erupted into whispers and gasps as they kissed in front of everyone, the boldness of the moment sending ripples through the guests. Some were scandalized, others were moved, but none could deny the intensity of the connection between the two of them. The kiss was passionate, desperate even, as though they were making up for the years they had lost. And when they pulled away, both breathless, there was no question in anyone's mind what had just transpired. Arabella and Sebastian were no longer bound by promises or uncertainty. They had chosen each other, and nothing would ever change that. As they stood there, in the center of the ballroom, their eyes locked in a gaze that said everything, Edmund Hartley, the man who had courted Arabella for so long, stepped back. There was no bitterness in his eyes, no anger, only a quiet understanding. He had known, on some level, that this moment would come, that Arabella's heart had always belonged to someone else. And though he had hoped for a future with her, he knew, in the end, that the love she shared with Sebastian was irreplaceable. With a final glance at Arabella, Edmund turned and walked away, leaving the couple to their moment. And in that moment, Arabella knew that the choice she had made was the right one. Sebastian had come back to claim her, and she had chosen him, in front of the world, in front of everyone who had ever doubted them. They were no longer two people bound by a distant promise, they were two souls united by a love that had stood the test of time. And as they stood together, surrounded by the guests who had witnessed their declaration, Arabella felt the weight of their love settle over her, a love that would carry them forward into a future of their own making. As the kiss between Arabella and Sebastian ended, the weight of the moment settled heavily around them. The room was still humming with shock and excitement, but for Arabella, everything else faded away. In that instant, she knew she had made the right choice. The love she had carried silently for 6 years, the love that had survived through uncertainty and separation, was now no longer a secret. It was out in the open, raw and real for everyone to witness. But there was no time to dwell on the aftermath of their public claiming. The night was still young, but the clock was ticking, and Sebastian's promise loomed large. Midnight was just hours away, and the urgency of their pact suddenly felt even more real. "Come with me, Arabella," Sebastian whispered as he pulled her gently away from the gaze of the assembled guests, his hand firmly clasping hers. He was done waiting, done hiding. It was time to fulfill the promise he had made to her all those years ago. They had waited long enough. He had waited long enough. With the ball still in full swing behind them, they moved quickly through the corridors of Thornton Manor. The staff, still in shock over Sebastian's dramatic entrance, watched them pass but said nothing, their eyes wide with wonder. Arabella's heart pounded in her chest as they reached the front door, where the chill of the night air hit her like a wave. Sebastian had already arranged everything, the horses were ready, the carriage, the route, everything was set for their immediate departure to Wintermere Hall. There would be no time to waste. The decision had been made, and now the future awaited them. The urgency of the moment made everything feel surreal. Arabella, still reeling from the intensity of what had just happened, barely had time to think before Sebastian gently guided her onto the horse. The cold bite of the wind only heightened her awareness, making her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. The familiar weight of the key pendant still hung around her neck, the symbol of the promise she had kept, and she knew that, with each passing second, she was leaving behind the life she had once known for the uncertainty of a new future. Sebastian, ever the composed figure, mounted his own horse with ease and, without a word, led the way. Arabella followed closely behind, the rhythmic sound of hooves echoing through the night. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a soft silver light across the snow-covered landscape as they rode through the grounds of Thornton Manor. Arabella's thoughts raced, but she found it difficult to focus on anything other than the powerful connection she now shared with Sebastian. The bond between them had been forged over years of longing and separation, but it was now stronger than ever. As they passed through the gates of Thornton Manor and into the vast, snowy expanse that lay beyond, the world seemed to narrow down to the two of them. There was no more uncertainty, no more waiting. The path to Windermere Hall lay ahead of them, and with it, a future that felt both thrilling and terrifying. The ride through the snow was breathtaking. The horses galloped through the frozen landscape, their breath visible in the cold air, kicking up powdery clouds behind them. Arabella couldn't help but marvel at the beauty of the scene, the snow-covered trees, the peaceful silence of the night, and the way the moonlight shimmered across the fields. It was a stark contrast to the storm of emotion swirling inside her. But despite the chaos in her heart, there was a sense of peace that settled over her as she rode beside Sebastian. She could feel his presence beside her, steady and unwavering, and for the first time in years, she felt as if she were exactly where she was meant to be. The cold wind stung her cheeks, but she didn't mind. It was the kind of cold that reminded her of the intensity of the moment, of the 6 years they had spent apart and the many more years they would now share together. "You're sure about this?" Sebastian's voice broke through the silence, his words filled with a tenderness that made Arabella's heart swell. She glanced at him, her eyes searching his face. There was still the slightest edge of uncertainty in his gaze, as though he, too, was still processing the enormity of what was happening. But Arabella didn't need to hear the words. She didn't need any more assurances. She knew in her heart that this was the right decision. "I'm sure," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions that threatened to overtake her. "I've always been sure. I just needed you to be sure, too." Sebastian's lips curved into a smile, and the warmth of it seemed to melt the cold night around them. "I've been sure for a long time, Arabella," he said softly, his voice filled with a quiet, fierce love. "But now I'm ready to finally claim what's mine." There was something in his tone, something deeper than the words themselves, and Arabella's heart skipped a beat. She felt the weight of everything they had been through, everything they had fought for, and in that moment, she knew they were finally on the path to something real. The journey to Windermere Hall seemed to take no time at all, though the miles passed quickly under the swift gallop of the horses. The quiet of the snow-covered world around them was broken only by the sound of hooves and the occasional gust of wind. Arabella had never felt more alive, more in tune with the world around her. The landscape was so still, so beautiful, that it felt as though time itself had stopped for a moment. And in that moment, Arabella realized just how much she had changed, how far she had come from the uncertain girl who had once stood by the window at Thornton Manor, waiting for a love she wasn't sure would ever come. As Windermere Hall loomed into view, its towering spires rising against the dark sky, Arabella's pulse quickened. This was the place Sebastian had promised her, a place built for her, a life built for them. The gates of Windermere were just ahead, and as they drew closer, the reality of what awaited them inside was almost too much to comprehend. They had made it. They had made it through the years of waiting, the doubts, and the uncertainty. And now, as the clock ticked toward midnight, Arabella knew that her life was about to begin anew. Windermere Hall stood before her like a beacon, its windows glowing warmly in the night. As they arrived, the doors of the grand estate opened, and a group of servants stood ready to welcome them. Sebastian dismounted gracefully, helping Arabella down from her horse, his hand steady and sure. Together, they walked toward the grand entrance, the weight of the moment heavy on their shoulders, but with a certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. They had made it, and as the door swung open, Arabella knew that whatever the future held, she was ready to face it with Sebastian by her side. Midnight was almost upon them, and their future had already begun. As the door to Windermere Hall swung open, a rush of warmth met Arabella and Sebastian, the grand estate's fires crackling merrily in the background as the staff greeted them with silent reverence. The air outside had been biting, the snow still thick beneath their boots, but inside, the warmth of the estate seemed to dissolve any lingering doubts or uncertainty. Arabella's heart beat wildly in her chest as she glanced around, the familiar sense of pine and spiced wine filling the air, and though it was beautiful, it felt like a dream, one she was afraid to wake from. She had made it here, to the place Sebastian had promised her, to the home he had spent years preparing for her. Every detail seemed designed with her in mind, from the grand, sweeping staircase to the portraits of distant ancestors that lined the walls, all standing as silent witnesses to the love that had led them here. They moved slowly through the halls, their footsteps echoing on the polished floors as Sebastian led her to the private wing of Wintermere Hall. Arabella's eyes scanned the surroundings, noting the elegance and history of the estate, but what stood out most to her was the palpable sense of home, of belonging. She had always dreamed of a place like this, a place where she could be herself without the weight of expectations. And now, here it was, waiting for her. "This is your home now," Sebastian said softly, his voice filled with a quiet intensity that sent a shiver through Arabella. She turned to him, meeting his gaze, and in his eyes, she saw the love that had sustained them both through 6 long years of waiting. He had built this place for her, for them, and as she stood there, taking it all in, she realized just how much he had sacrificed for their future. They reached a door at the end of the hallway, its frame intricately carved with delicate designs, and Sebastian reached for a key that hung from a chain around his neck. With a gentle motion, he unlocked the door and pushed it open, revealing a room bathed in soft candlelight. Arabella stepped inside, her breath catching at the sight before her. The room was like something out of a dream. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled with every book they had ever discussed during their walks and conversations. A large window overlooked the snow-covered grounds, the moonlight streaming through and casting a soft glow over the space. But it was the studio that took Arabella's breath away, a corner of the room dedicated entirely to her art, with easels, canvases, and paints all set up, ready for her to create. There were even sketches of landscapes she had drawn years ago, hung neatly on the walls, as if Sebastian had known exactly what she needed. Arabella walked deeper into the room, her fingers trailing over the materials, over the brushes, as if they were somehow part of her. She could hardly believe this was real, that this space had been created with her in mind. "I've spent years planning this," Sebastian said quietly, his voice heavy with emotion. "Every room in this wing is built for you, Arabella. Every detail, every piece of furniture, every book, it's all for you. I want you to be free here, to create, to dream, to live the life you've always wanted. I built this for you, not just as a home, but as a promise." Arabella's heart swelled with emotion as she turned to face him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She had never imagined that someone could love her so deeply, that someone could dedicate so much of themselves to ensuring her happiness. And now, here he was, offering her a life she had never dared to dream of. "Sebastian, this is everything I've ever wanted," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I never thought this could be real." He stepped closer to her, his hands cupping her face as he looked into her eyes, his expression soft and full of tenderness. "It's real, Arabella," he said gently. "It's all real, because you've always been the one I've waited for. And now, you're here." Without another word, he pulled her into his arms, and Arabella melted into him, the years of longing, of waiting, of wondering all crashing down in that one embrace. It was a kiss that had been years in the making, a kiss that promised not just a future, but a lifetime of shared dreams and passions. As their lips met, it was as though the entire world fell away. The kiss was sweet, soft, and yet filled with an urgency that spoke of everything they had both experienced in their time apart. There was no doubt now, no hesitation. They were here, together, at last. As they pulled apart, their foreheads resting together, Arabella could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about the space they stood in, about Wintermere Hall, it was about the life they were now beginning. It was about the love they had fought for, the love they had kept alive through years of distance and silence. And it was about the future they would build, side by side. Sebastian pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her as they stood in the room that was now their shared space, the place where their new life would begin. "Arabella," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "I love you. I've always loved you, and I'll always love you." Her heart swelled at his words, and she pulled him even closer, her hands resting on his chest. "And I love you, Sebastian," she whispered back, her voice full of quiet certainty. "Always." The room seemed to hold its breath as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms. It was as if everything had led to this moment, this promise, this love. In the soft glow of the candles, in the warmth of Windermere Hall, Arabella knew that she had found her home, her place, her future. And in Sebastian, she had found her everything. But even as the night unfolded, with the fire crackling and the quiet peace of their shared space settling in, there was still the matter of one final promise that remained unspoken, the future they would build together, the family they would create, the life they would live. And so, as the clock struck midnight, marking the beginning of their new life, Arabella knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter of love, of hope, and of dreams finally realized. Sebastian had kept his promise, and now they would create a future that would last forever. The days following Christmas Eve were a whirlwind of activity and emotion as Arabella and Sebastian navigated the aftermath of their bold declaration, preparing to face a world that would surely scrutinize their every move. The scandal of their public claiming had sent ripples through society, with whispers circulating through the highest echelons of London society. The grandeur of Thornton Manor's Christmas ball, followed by Sebastian's unannounced entrance, had sparked both admiration and outrage. The guests, both shocked and enthralled by the passion and intensity of their reunion, spoke in hushed tones about the Duke's audacity, but also about the undeniable bond that had been witnessed between him and Arabella. Lady Thornton, still grappling with the reality that her daughter had defied society's expectations, had struggled to come to terms with Arabella's decision. Despite her earlier concerns about Arabella's future, she had reluctantly begun to see the depth of the connection between the couple, even if it did not align with her vision of what Arabella's life should look like. Lord Thornton, on the other hand, had passed away before he could fully grasp the unfolding of Arabella's future, but Arabella had carried the weight of his wishes in her heart. His final requests had pushed her toward a security she knew she had to seek, but now, she was left to balance the love she shared with Sebastian with the duty she had always held toward her family. Yet, despite these complexities, Arabella felt a sense of clarity that had eluded her for years. The promise Sebastian had made to her was no longer just a distant hope, it had materialized in a way that she had never dreamed possible. As the couple settled into Windermere Hall, it became clear that their love was not just an emotional reunion, it was a partnership founded on mutual respect, intellectual connection, and a shared understanding of the world. Every conversation they had felt like a continuation of the debates and discussions they had started all those years ago in the library at Thornton Manor. They had built a life in which each felt seen, heard, and valued, and they knew that this union would be something far deeper than what society could ever understand. As the days passed, Sebastian's commitment to Arabella grew more evident. The estate at Windermere began to take shape not just as a physical residence but as a symbol of their love, a love that had withstood years of separation, doubts, and external pressures. With every conversation about their future, Sebastian remained unwavering in his belief that Arabella deserved the space to grow, to thrive, and to follow her passions. It was clear to him now that this was the kind of partnership he had always desired, one where both of them were free to be their true selves, bound not by the expectations of their titles but by the depth of their bond. Despite their overwhelming connection, there remained the matter of their marriage, the final step that would publicly solidify their union. Though the couple had never doubted the sincerity of their love, society's expectations loomed large. They would have to face the public scrutiny that came with their bold choices, particularly Arabella's decision to reject years of suitors and openly defy convention. The marriage, they both knew, would not be just a celebration of their love, it would be a statement. And so, the preparations for their wedding began, but not without a deep sense of purpose. Arabella knew that their wedding would not just be a ceremony, it would be the culmination of years of waiting, longing, and promises kept. As she began planning, she thought back to the key pendant Sebastian had given her all those years ago, the symbol of their pact. It had always been a reminder of the love that had sustained her, but now, it felt like a bridge, a tangible representation of all that they had overcome together. In the midst of the wedding preparations, Arabella found herself immersed in designing her wedding dress. She chose a simple, elegant design, one that reflected both her personality and her commitment to the life she was about to begin. The fabric was ivory silk, the color symbolizing the purity of their bond, while the dress itself was understated, no frills, no excessive ornamentation, just a reflection of the love she had found. The key pendant, now a cherished heirloom, was incorporated into the design, sewn carefully over her heart, as a constant reminder of the promise Sebastian had made. The gown was a perfect blend of tradition and personal significance, and as Arabella worked with the seamstress, she couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation growing within her. She had waited so long for this moment, and now, the future felt tangible. The couple's wedding plans moved forward, but despite the whirlwind of preparations, the atmosphere remained one of calm assurance. Sebastian, ever the steady force, handled all the logistics with quiet efficiency, ensuring that everything was in place for the special day. Though Arabella had designed the gown, Sebastian took great care to ensure the wedding would be intimate, meaningful, and true to their love. There would be no grand affair filled with extravagant guests, instead, it would be a small gathering, close family and friends who had supported them from the beginning. It would be a wedding that reflected their love, deep, personal, and enduring. As the days before the wedding passed, Arabella found herself filled with a quiet excitement, but there was also a sense of peace that had settled over her. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, the couple had shared moments of tenderness, of quiet understanding. Each day they spent together in Windermere Hall felt like a renewal of the promise they had made to each other. When the day of the wedding finally arrived, the estate was transformed into a winter wonderland. The chapel, small and intimate, was adorned with winter flowers, holly, and ivy, the scent of pine filling the air. Guests began to arrive, a small but heartfelt gathering of family and close friends. Edmund Hartley, now reconciled with Arabella and fully aware of her decision, attended the wedding with grace and dignity, offering his warm congratulations. Lillian, Arabella's ever-supportive sister, stood by her side as maid of honor, and Edmund, though he had lost Arabella's heart, took his place as a groomsman, marking the maturity and respect that had blossomed between the two families. The ceremony was simple but profound, with the couple writing their own vows. Arabella spoke first, her voice steady, though emotion shimmered just beneath the surface. "Sebastian, I choose you, today and every day. I choose you not because I have to, but because I want to. You have shown me what love truly means, and I promise to stand by you, to walk beside you, and to never falter in my commitment to you." Sebastian's vows were equally heartfelt, his words filled with quiet intensity. "Arabella, I have loved you for 6 years, through silence and distance, through time and uncertainty. But I have never doubted that you were the one for me. I promise to cherish you, to protect you, and to always honor the bond we share." The exchange of rings, with his mother's ring passed down to Arabella, was a quiet yet significant moment. As the priest pronounced them husband and wife, the small chapel filled with the soft murmur of approval, the congregation of loved ones witnessing the union of two souls who had always belonged together. Their first kiss as husband and wife was tender, full of promise, and it was witnessed with quiet admiration by those in attendance. It was a kiss that sealed the commitment they had made, not just to each other, but to the life they would now build together. As the reception unfolded in the grand hall of Wintermere, the joy in the air was palpable. The newlyweds danced their first dance, the music sweet and slow, their steps perfectly in sync as they moved together on the floor. Arabella felt as though she were floating, every moment a dream, every touch from Sebastian a reminder of the love that had brought them here. The guests cheered, toasting to the couple's happiness and their long-awaited union, and for Arabella, it felt like the world was finally in place. The future was no longer uncertain. It was real, and it was theirs to create. The evening was filled with laughter, love, and joy, but the most intimate moment of the night was yet to come. As the final strains of music faded and the guests began to retire, Sebastian and Arabella stepped out onto the balcony, the night sky above them filled with stars. Sebastian took Arabella's hand and looked at her with a tenderness that spoke of everything they had been through together. "Are you ready for our life together, Arabella?" he asked softly. Arabella smiled, her heart full. "With you beside me, I can face anything." The night air was cold, but their love was warm, and as they stood together under the stars, Arabella knew that this was only the beginning. They had faced uncertainty, scandal, and heartache, but now, they had each other, and that was all they would ever need. If this story of patient devotion and Christmas miracles touched your heart, please subscribe, like, and share. What would you wait 6 years for? Tell us in the comments. Another breathtaking romance awaits in our next video. Click to continue the journey. Merry Christmas from Royal Vintage Love.